Okay, so when John asked me to give this talk tonight, I made the decision to come out of my comfort zone because I think that's what Borderlands are all about. And actually, I'm quite comfortable about talking about physical death. That's something that I do quite a lot with my friends when I give talks and through my website. So to go into a realm where I'm looking at the metaphorical death and one that's a little bit more personal to me hasn't actually been easy. And it was really interesting how the talks have kind of played out tonight. I think Ian's talk was absolutely amazing at the beginning and a hard act to follow. And then looking at the art from Teresa was just amazing. But before I forget it, because I thought about it when she did her talk, I just want to go back to this idea of the wall and kind of embedding memories within a wall. And I think what I want to say before I start tonight with tarot is it's a very complicated thing to study, but interpretation is key. And for that reason, what I'm doing tonight is I'm not going to give you a history of the tarot card, and this isn't going to be an academic talk. It's going to be my own personal journey with this card. And basically, I've chosen some tarot cards, the Death card, that resonated with me on my own journey of deciding how best to interpret a card that, to be brutally honest, haunted me for a really, really long time. When I was 19, so over 10 years ago now, I was taken by my mum to a tarot reader, and it was the first card that was pulled, and I had the reaction that I think a lot of people have to that card, and I panicked and I thought, oh my God, who's going to die? You know, and I think most tarot readers are practiced at waiting for the gasp and then kind of explaining that it doesn't always mean a physical death. It can do. But actually, more often, it's in a lot less of a literal sense. My first reaction to that card changed over the last 10 years of my life because actually I get it all the time. I got in this routine of going once a year to see a psychic, and sure enough, it would pop up. And what was originally a really scary reaction turned into a bit of an eye roll. And, you know, death is change, and I shouldn't say that so flippantly because that's about what I'm going to talk about. But I suppose my point is that I got stuck in a cycle, and what I want to do is put a little bit of personal into this talk, which is actually quite scary for me because I tend to hide behind other people's quotes and academia quite a lot, and say that actually for me, the death card continued to turn up in my life because of things I wasn't doing. So my talk tonight is about research that I did myself, sometimes frantically late at night online when I was angry with the death card, other times because I was thinking I'm a deeply spiritual person and I want to follow this and I want to understand why I can't get rid of this card. So that's what I'm going to do today, and it's not a sign of how long my talk's going to be, but I am going to go back to the 15th century. You're all like, we've got trains to get. But I just want to start with, if we played word association, I imagine most people in this room, if I said death card, would say skeleton or skull. And that's because it probably is the most traditional symbol that we see within tarot for the death card. So here's some really early examples. Actually, these are from incomplete decks. There's an amazing collection of these that are held in various museums and are really expensive. That are from incomplete decks, but these are sort of two of my favourites, and I think it's just worth sort of noting that actually we'll see the skeleton go through with us as we look at later examples of it, but what we'll see is a slight change in the skeleton on occasions. I think the one on the right here, I'm just going to talk about in a bit more detail. I think with this one, I always feel like he's dancing, even though he's not actually moving, but I will talk about Dance Macabre later. This one here, the horse, is something that we see in traditional Rider-Waite, which is a later example that I have. But it really does sort of symbolise that noble and that power, and kind of reminds us that that guy on a horse was a human being. And with his scythe, which again is an item that we see continually in the card, he's dusting it over the people below him. For death, there is absolutely nobody that doesn't die, right? So we see all these people being trampled by him. He's kind of just like swooning his scythe over them. He's kind of riding forth. And I think in some ways in this imagery, we do see a separation there between death and the person. this idea that death is kind of plaguing us and going through us, and perhaps we're huddled and hiding from it. And in so many ways, I always saw that interpretation, and I couldn't really see past it until I started thinking about death in terms of tarot in a different context. And one of my favourite ever books on tarot is this one, by Rachel Pollack. A lot of the reviews on Amazon will tell you that you have to be pretty like high-end with tarot to understand it. You really don't. It's super interesting, and I'd recommend it to anyone. But when we think of the death card, we may initially think of death and be frightened. But most of the time, the meanings that we'll get from it is transformation, change, periods in our life where things alter and shift. And every time I pulled that card, I thought I was in that time period. And I'm like, how long is this going to go on for? And then I read this by Rachel, and it really changed my perception, because she says that contrary to what many people believe, the card of death does not actually refer to the transformation itself. Rather, it shows us the precise moment at which we give up our old masks and allow the transformation to take place. In my own life, I actually had a very corporate career for 8 years. I worked as a police intelligence analyst for major and complex crime. In my personal life, I was an artist, a writer, and I really felt like the borders between those two personalities never quite fit. It's not a romantic ending where they find a harmonious place inside Lucy Talbot. What ends up happening is, about a month ago, I walked out on my job. And what I kind of feel is, like the little people down here and the hands and stuff, is before I looked at them as the victims of death, but actually I start to see myself as death. I see myself as a person, because at the end of the day, there's plenty of skeletons in this room tonight, not just the ones in our closets, the ones within us. We are people. We eventually rot and we die, and that's what's left, right? So I start to see it as a lot more of a jolly thing in my own kind of macabre way, which is why I went for this really bright colour choice at this point in the presentation. But with these heads that are rolling around, I kind of see them as ourselves, you know? And actually in our life, we're not the same person from the beginning to the end. So I started seeing this death as perhaps one of these heads being like Lucy Talbot, the police analyst. And I'm not saying that in life we have to keep chopping parts of ourselves off, but actually, if a part isn't working for you, and actually you're doing it just because you're really good at it, and everyone keeps telling you that it's really great to have such an amazing career and you're making loads of money, like, I say chop your head off and join me in unemployment, because that's where I am right now. Thank you. I like to just turn into like a rally. Good. Going back to the slightly more serious nature of my talk, I put these examples in because, going back to the slide that you saw before, I think we still see the skeleton very much with the scythe, with the similar iconography. And everybody will be familiar, I hope, with this card. It's probably the most popular choice. It certainly is for phone cases and T-shirts at the market. Arthur Waite's deck, I think, takes it to a slightly different level, perhaps almost brings in a little bit of a sort of religious, almost sort of Christian presence with the revelation of the white horse. But we also just have a lot more going on. And actually, it can be quite, you really have to sometimes look at it to kind of work out what's actually going on in the picture. But I mean, it's an amazing piece of work. And, you know, we have praying hands here, we have bodies. We have these crowns on the floor, and I think it's really important when I give talks normally about death. I talk quite a lot about the physical self and, you know, how we can't take it all with us when we die, and clearly I think that because I walked out on my job. But this idea of crowns and worldly things, you know, just kind of being spewed everywhere, because the reality is that we can't take it with us. I also just think, again, it's kind of more symbolism of change and sort of embracing that process. What we do have is a really beautiful, hopeful sunset in the background there. And I think nature plays a much bigger part in the card as time goes on and artists design it, because that meaning within the card about change starts to link much more again into the natural. I couldn't ever give a talk about tarot and not mention Crowley. And I wanted to just read, really, because like most things Crowley related, sometimes it's better just to like read it because it can get quite complicated. But Lady Frida's design here of death is just such a beautiful one. I absolutely love it. It's one of my favourite cards. I own the deck. I don't use it personally, but I do like to look through it because I think the colours are amazing. And I also think it kind of harps back to something a lot more Egyptian than perhaps some of the other more traditional and kind of well-known sort of first go-to decks are from. But the bit I wanted to read to you is that death is not so much destruction as change. Thus we have in this card the scorpion, representing primitive energy, always ready to commit suicide, and that's according to legend, when heavily beset, but prepared to undergo any transformation which will permit its continued existence in a different form. So we have the same meaning here, but what we have is animals at different stages within the card. So we have this fish and kind of serpent here. It's all very fluid movement. We have the skeleton himself dancing the dance macabre. He's dancing in the middle of the picture. And what we saw in a lot of the early examples was a very stagnant kind of nobleman. Here he's directly interacting with the natural space around him. And right up to the top of his crown, we have this eagle-like shape. And I just think in many ways it just speaks for itself, really, in terms of the philosophy that I've been attempting to put across. I think this binary between nature and us can be really lost, and actually in a lot of the artist depictions is very separate. Here Dali just slaps a skull straight on the tree, which I really like. And we have this, I have such a way with words. We have this really beautiful figure at the side. There's a real androgynous feel to this person, creature, skeleton, we're not really sure, because it doesn't really matter because the emphasis is on that central message, I think, in this one. And we have a really beautiful rose too to the other side of it. In true Dali style, we've got that stark landscape. So we're seeing like a different depiction, but again, all those sort of messages that I think are really important and can get lost are in there. I've added this one on as a bit of a different leap, and I have a note somewhere, which I've abandoned, that I just wanted to read, because I couldn't not, being Death and the Maiden, have some form of female thing in there. And I've gone with Callie in this instance, because this comes from the Universal Goddess Tarot deck. I mean, there's just so many kinds of decks out there. I mean, you could just Google anything and you could get a deck for it. But I like the fact that she is, in a way, still giving us those same components. You know, we've still got, instead of the scythe, we've got the dagger. I mean, like the literal death there of the severed head, the skeleton iconography, the wealth, like it's all within there. And she represents time, change, power, creation, preservation and destruction all in one, which really, when you think about it, is the life cycle of death. She's often portrayed standing or dancing on her consort, the god Shiva. Motionless, he lays below her as she does the dance of life and the dance of death. Because in the instance when you think of her, they really are the same thing. This is one of my favourite tarot depictions of death. I absolutely love it. It's by Robert Place, and he's designed countless decks. He's got an amazing website, actually, with lots of art on. But what I really love about this is we move from the skeleton to a, well, I guess woman, but, you know, person. And it's just beautiful. It's really serene. It's really still. The nature here, we've got the autumn leaf falling. So the life cycle is sort of depicted at a different point of change there. Instead of the bright sunshine or the animals alive, we're kind of capturing that dying moment, and I think it's a really tender one. We've also got the massive scythe, so that's still there, sort of showing us this kind of, you know, quite attractive sort of Lady Death thing going on. The star in the sky and the bird again. So a different depiction, a lot cleaner looking, but I think still a really beautiful and important one. The final card, that my friends are laughing, but the final card is actually by my friend who is an artist called Lozzie Bones. And actually, we got quite drunk in Richmond last week, and I was saying that I wanted to use this card. And Lozzie actually, because she'd had quite a lot to drink, kind of went on this amazing splurge, and it was just great because she was talking about her design for it. Lozzie's designed an entire deck of tarot cards and comes at this from a very different place to me, whereas I am like a spiritual, new age, crazy hippie lady. Lozzie is like raving atheist? Is that like a fair...
Raving.
Yeah. So when she took on this project to design a tarot deck, she came at it from a completely different space to perhaps how I interpret and how I look at things. And I found that really, really interesting. In every single other card, skulls are very prevalent in Lozzie's work. She's used them to make the minor arcana. They're present in every single card. But here she's chosen to take it out. And this was a very intentional thing because it's all about this cycle of life. You can step in if I'm wrong with any of this. And here we go. We've got the sides kind of meeting together in the middle. And with this whole image, we're creating this circular shape that's representing that circle. We've got this night sky in the middle, and we've got this gorgeous cat down in the skeleton's arms as well, being cradled. So we've again got that direct comparison between life and death there, birth, rebirth. And you can see the beautiful detail there with the tail and the skeleton hands intertwined, which I think is just lovely. So to recap then, I thought instead of me trying to say what I've said again, because I'd probably say it completely differently, I just wanted to leave you with this painting that I absolutely love by this artist here. And just read what she wrote about it when she put it up for sale on her website. And, you know, you can buy it. It's absolutely gorgeous. She said, the death card in tarot represents the never-ending circle of death and rebirth as a precondition for new life and creation. It symbolises the ending of a circle, elimination of old patterns, and a psychological transformation. There is no concern whether the end is painful or if the new beginning welcomed. This card implies the need to let something go and requires the understanding of the circle of life to do so. Thank you. Yeah.
Where does it sit? Can you talk a bit about that?
How long have you got? No, I'm only joking. I always have on my bios, it sounds really pretentious, but this whole idea of having a mortuary preoccupation, it comes from my favourite film, Harold Maude. I think I've been obsessed with death since a very young age, and I think a lot of that bore out of an anxiety of being a child and not really understanding it and kind of having a fear that people were going to leave me. Do with that what you will. But for me, what kind of ended up happening is when I started my police career, which, you know, can be very exciting and very rewarding and very amazing, but also can surround you with a very specific type of person, I just knew I needed more. So my plan was actually to do an MA in journalism, but when I went to the MA fair, I saw a massive banner for death, religion and culture, and before you knew it, and to my mother's horror, I was talking about Japanese cremation with the professor, and she was like, don't worry about submitting for next year, you can just start in 3 weeks. So I did, and it just opened up all these incredible doors. I met all these amazing people. I realised actually it is quite niche and you can meet these people from all over the world and interact with them. And Death the Maiden was kind of my way of trying to kind of put something down on paper, albeit a website, but actually kind of have a place where I could put that stuff, because I was just meeting so many amazing people and kind of going on this weird journey myself with it that I just wanted to capture it somewhere. So I suppose that's answers your question, hopefully.
It's ongoing, I take it. It's obviously very much ongoing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my website, we post on it every week, so there's always a different piece on there. My own sort of personal journey with this stuff, I mean, in a weird way, has kind of started because however much I joke about it, I did pull that card all the time for 10 years. And I've only really stopped pulling it since resigning from my job. So for me, who knows, you know, I might have to sever more of my heads along the way, but at the moment, I'm kind of comfortable with that one being down there, and I guess I'm kind of up on my skeleton horse, sort of wandering around at the moment.
You're grazing.
I was just going to ask, were you aware of it beforehand?
Yeah.
You were fascinated by death from an early age. Were you aware of tarot beforehand?
Yeah, and actually, I was kind of your classic teenage cliche in many ways, and I was kind of experimenting with lots of different things, which I think has kind of allowed me to get on a lot of paths a lot earlier. And I had been up until that point doing readings for myself and things like that, but I mean, I don't know if anyone else does that in the room, but certainly your first time to go and actually see someone is so different from you doing it yourself. And it was quite crazy. And my mum was there. And the first thing the woman said to me was, would you like your mum to leave? And I was like, no, she can stay. And then it was like really crazy. But I think absolutely it sort of was always there. And I was always interested. And I was quite young when I first got a deck. But I think I was probably about 10 or 11, I think. But I was just always so fascinated with the pictures and the stories. And when I was a child, my whole family, like my mum and her sisters, they used to go to psychic fairs all the time, and I wasn't allowed to go, but I was allowed to listen to the tape recording afterwards, and clearly I had no idea what was going on. But I think I always was very drawn to it, you know, and it's just really guided me and helped me. And hopefully, like through my talk, I've kind of got across the point that there's sort of meaning and philosophy in it that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be spiritual to get something from that message. And that's where I think this whole thing that Teresa was talking about with the wall is so important. I mean, tarot started as trump cards, you know, but I'm a firm believer that the more time that people are putting meaning on things, it becomes its own entity and it becomes its own thing. And that's why I very much believe in the meanings that are in the cards. Ooh, I don't know my weaponry. This one, the bow, yes. Yeah, I didn't mention that, did I? Probably because I didn't really know what it was. So, thank you. Yeah, I think that's a...
On a not pale horse, you know, look at that.
Yeah. No, that is really true. I mean, I suppose you've still got that sort of weapon and that power attached to it. It's so interesting with some of these really old cards because they're so detailed and they're so incredible, but we don't really know much about them. And there's a lot of argument or healthy debate within academic circles, hence the 1142 question mark, because I was like, you never know, there could be someone in the audience that knows their stuff. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that is really interesting. And I think the more you look, the more you find in these cards. You know, it is like a whirlpool of discovery in that sense. Or like,
what would you say are the other scary cards? Tower.
Personally,
and as a reader,
I don't.
how would you waylay someone's fears when they come up?
I would say, this is going to sound like such a politician's answer, and I'm so sorry, but I would say it all depends on the context of what you're reading. I personally, when I read with spirit, so it's not all me and the cards are just a way for me to kind of, I tend to be a bit like with this talk and my notes really, you know, I start off and then it's like the deck's down and I'm like, you know, just talking. But to sort of directly answer your question, I mean, personally, I've always had an issue with swords and the death card. I feel like everyone has different things that come up in their life and different meanings within cards. It would be like really pink and fluffy of me to say that I don't feel that there are particular cards to fear, but I don't feel there are particular cards to fear because I feel that there are lessons within those cards. And what I've learned on my journey with the death card is finding an understanding in this constant pattern of something coming up and actually looking a bit deeper and kind of changing my meaning of it because I think I was getting the wrong one. I was out of it really quickly.
It's kind of detrimental to the whole process, for the whole reason for having your tarots read.
Yeah, is to get that guidance. So, sorry that's a bit of a woolly answer, but I think that's probably the best way I can answer it under this time. I just feel like, in a way, you're just completely bang on with what Ian and I were talking about, because I was like, it's been a really good evolution this evening of ideas in that sense. It's like yours was so powerful that we didn't have any questions, because like, how can you even say anything after that? But at the same time, I think it set a really good tone for the evening, because with all the anxieties that we have culturally and socially at the moment, you acknowledge that elephant in all of our rooms, or skeleton in the closet, as I seem to like using constantly. So I think you're absolutely right. And I think certainly with anything, there's always a public and private scale to everything. So yes, and I like to see it as kind of taking a bit of a philosophy, hopefully, from what I've said. And I think it could be applied to anything. So.
But are you familiar with the idea of the near-death experience as being the key shamanic initiator?
Actually, in my original talk, I was going to talk about death meditations as well and shamanic practice, but I realised like we could be here all night. I've done death meditation and workshops like that in the past and never found myself particularly good at it, but I think I probably need to master sort of first level meditation first. But I think absolutely, I think all these things are interconnected in that sense.